President Trump survived an assassination attempt yesterday, and everything I want to say still feels insufficient. I've been thinking about how this is just another landmark in a long line of American political violence that dates back to the beginning. I grew up in New York, and we talked about George Washington surviving an assassination attempt when they poisoned his peas at Francis Tavern, and they were sitting there. So the story goes, cannonballs leaving the British warships flying into the roof of the tavern right there on the East River. And the owner of the place had found out that they poisoned George Washington's peas and switched it out real quick and saved his life. And then obviously we can't help but think about Abraham Lincoln. And so the story goes, Alan Pinkerton foiled a plot against Abraham early on to take his life. And they switched out Lincoln with a body double and snuck Lincoln back into the White House. And everyone made fun of him for it in the papers the next day. But, Lincoln, as the days got closer to his assassination, he was dreaming about it. And he talked about it, he wrote about it. Supposedly, he had been dreaming, if you don't already know, he'd been dreaming that he was walking through the White House and came upon his body, what he thought was his body. And I actually have it written down. What he said, what he wrote himself was, "I left my bed and wandered downstairs. I kept on until I arrived in the East Room. There, I met a sickening surprise. Before me was a catafalque on which rested a corpse in funeral vestments. Around it were stationed soldiers who were acting as guards. And there was a throng of people, some gazing mournfully upon the corpse whose face was covered. In his dream, he pulled the sheet away from the corpse's face and was, as he put it, sort of relieved it wasn't him because it didn't have a beard. What he didn't know was that in real life, obviously, once he was assassinated, they shaved his beard. So perhaps he saw some portal into the future where he was shaven. And that whole time was odd because there was seances happening in the White House. His wife had been conducting lots of them, trying to communicate with the dead. They were, grieving for a nation and also for their own family. Yesterday just reminded me that the system in place, whatever it is, has dealt in blood before. If you have family who lived through the 60s, they know all about that. And then it seemed like in the past maybe let's say 10 years, they switched to dealing in character assassinations, taking out people digitally, taking care of them, their character, and erasing them from the polite conversation. They did that to Trump. They did that to a lot of others I'm sure you can think of. And many of us were concerned that they would switch back to this. Now, I don't know if the people in charge of whatever went down yesterday are involved, but with everything going on and all the chaos and confusion, it's either a result of the pandemic of incompetence that's been going on, or people exploiting that incompetence to satisfy their own bloodlust for power. And this has been it's unique to today, obviously, but it's been going on for ages. And in Mexico, just recently, they had, I think, 30 plus candidates assassinated. It's nuts. And on this show, we've been talking a lot about patcon. We've been talking about Gladio. We've been talking about Operation Northwoods. And a lot of these things seem like they're things in the past, but I believe they never ended. And I believe perhaps the things that happened yesterday could be a part of that. It was a deranged moment, and we're still, it's early on. We still don't know what's going on. And I urge everyone to not get too emotionally connected to anything in the news just yet, because we just don't know. And the war on reality is used like as a cudgel against you to make you feel a certain way emotionally, whether it's from the right or the left, whomever, you don't know. They want you to be emotionally attached. And if you're emotionally attached, I think you're easy to manipulate. So until we know more, the best thing to do, I think, is read widely and be skeptical. Because all these years after JFK's assassination, we're still questioning that. And he's got a nephew running for president right now who's still questioning that. and he saw his uncle lose his life and his father, and these are strange events. JFK's brain is actually missing. Someone actually took the brain that was left over, and they don't know where it went. The gun that assassinated President Garfield is also missing. Who knows why? I don't know. All I'm saying is remain suspicious of everything. We don't know what's going on. Your perception is under assault, and there are verifiable monsters in power to this day. And that's what we're going to talk about. This is Inverted World Live. All right, welcome back. It's good to see you. We're here, we're live. It's good to be back and live in studio. I'm your host, Shane Cashman. I'm joined today by Wesley. What's up, dude?
What's up?
How are you?
Oh, man, it's been a wild couple of days.
It's crazy. It's crazy to see history. You know, like when lockdowns happened, it felt like the first truly absurd thing to happen in a while.
Yep.
I mean, we're around the same age, I believe.
Yeah.
I'm older than you by some, but we've inherited... we have a whole collection.
I mean, there was what's his face, the Jussie Smollett thing.
That's ridiculous. But I'm thinking like, just in terms of these crazy, powerful images that just become instantly a part of culture. Like they're a legend now. For me, I mean, like we've talked on the show before, Oklahoma City bombing, then 9/11, we have Columbine. Just we can talk about all the things behind those. Just strictly image-wise, the way these are played out, the way they rolled the TV out in front of everyone in my school, at least, to make us watch the towers fall. Yep. Who knows what's going on? I think I have questions about everything. But the way the images, we collect these crazy atrocity images throughout time. Yesterday was just, it felt like that again. Yeah. And lockdowns was, I guess, the most recent where we watched the whole world shut down.
Yeah. It was also strange because it felt like nothing happened at all too. Like it was, that moment of shock when you get hit and you don't feel it.
Yes.
It's like, it feels like that took a while where it was like, oh, this just happened. I gotta go to the store.
You know what I mean? Like life is continuing. Yeah. It's weird because I'm so used. I told you before we went live, I love talking to people who are older about where they were for certain events. Mm-hmm. So like, where were they for JFK? Yeah. Everyone at a certain age, whether they were kids, older, they've got a story.
Yep.
And yesterday, I was expecting, because I was on a road trip home, to kind of come in contact with people. But it was like, unless you're plugged into social media or the TV or certain channels on the TV, no one talked about it. And that might be because politics has become so divisive, and people are afraid to say they're even mournful.
Yeah. Where were you when Trump fell during an incident?
Man, the media is casting a spell, as always. They'll downplay that, but they'll make everything else the end of the world, so long as it helps their narrative and their power. So today's guest, we booked prior to yesterday's insane events, but I couldn't have asked for a better guest today because she's been doing so much great research into things that remind me of Operation Northwoods. When I tell people about Operation Northwoods, a lot of people who aren't reading up about this kind of stuff, they'll say, well, that's in the past. It doesn't happen anymore. And then I show them the Fednapping plot against Governor Whitmer, which sounds eerily similar to the things they were planning on Northwoods. And that's just one instance. So without any further ado, let's bring in Christina Urso.
Hello. Thank
What's
you.
up? How are you?
Thank
you for being here.
Thank you for that nice introduction.
Oh, well, I love the work you do. And it's important. And I think I'm always pointing people to what you're talking about, especially the ones who think, something like Northwoods is a thing of the past. They're like, nah, they wouldn't do that anymore. Everyone's fine now. Everyone's nice, right? Is everyone nice now? Why not?
Yeah, well, it's the same thing as said with MK Ultra, right? Oh, that was in the past. Oh, they don't do that anymore. The CIA wouldn't be experimenting on humans today.
No. Everyone's better
right.
Now. We're safer now than we've ever been. They're definitely not taking advantage of us through the internet at all. So yesterday we saw this failed assassination attempt on Trump. What were your thoughts after that?
Oh boy. I was shocked, I guess. I didn't have this on my bingo card, although it doesn't totally surprise me at all because nothing surprises me at this point. I think I was kind of just shocked that, like, okay, this is where we're at, and we still have 4 months left to go. So my immediate concern is like, well, how much worse are things going to get? And then the other thing that was in my mind immediately too is if that was just a little bit off, right? Less than an inch off, maybe a centimeter off, and it hit him. Who knows where we could be right now? Like we could be in some kind of civil conflict or something. That's pretty scary. And I think people haven't really taken the time, and really we haven't had the time to really sit and think about that.
That's why it's so hard to talk about it. But I have a million things I want to say, and it feels like it connects to a million things I'm always thinking about. But the news it comes out so rapidly from every direction, and there's bad people sharing bad information. There's good people sharing bad information. There's good people sharing good information, and it's hard to keep up. So, and we'll get into your work with Whitmer in a bit, but before that, like how did your work on something like the Fednapping plot, how does that affect the way you see something like yesterday?
Well, I guess you could say I don't have trust in the institutions anymore, although I hadn't for a while. I mean, I'll say, you know, obviously prior to the Whitmer stuff, I had been looking into patcon actually. Then the Whitmer thing happened, so I kind of took a break from patcon to focus on the Whitmer thing. But the parallels were there. So I think that it's kind of just maybe black-pilled me a little bit more. But everything I've seen, you know, since I started working on the documentary, at least, I feel part of me isn't surprised by something like this, though. And it's just like, oh, yeah, of course, that was going to be, you know, the next thing that they do.
Right.
And I feel like that's kind of an abnormal response.
Yeah, it's abnormal to people who don't know that this is a more normal thing happening, I think, behind the scenes. Can you explain for people like what patcon is? Give like a brief overview of that.
Yes, sure. A brief rundown of patcon is that patcon was an operation run by the FBI in the 90s. For people who are familiar with COINTELPRO, which was, you know, from the 60s and 70s, and the FBI was infiltrating like leftist anti-war groups. They also, though, in COINTELPRO were infiltrating groups like the KKK as well, white power groups or whatever. I think people don't know about that aspect of it, but basically you hear about that all the time. patcon is what you don't hear about. It's essentially COINTELPRO, but aimed at the right and militia groups. So in the 80s, there was a group, a legitimate kind of like extremist group called the Order, who, you know, was connected to the murder of a Jewish radio host. And so there was talk in the 90s, like of a revival of the Order, that maybe a second order was going to be created. So the FBI decided that they would just create the group themselves, right?
Oh, of course.
It's like what Lenin said, the best way to control the opposition is to lead it ourselves. The FBI is like, well, in order to prevent the Order from reorganizing, from getting back together and establishing a new group, we're going to do it and we'll lead it ourselves.
Sounds like Gladio, right?
It's exactly like Gladio, yes. But here in America, run domestically. Gladio was run overseas, and that was kind of, you know, in Europe to combat ostensibly the Soviets, you know, during the Cold War, and to prevent the Soviet Union from expanding and creating more satellite states. So they created these kind of like fascist networks and fascist groups, and they ended up creating stay-behind networks, essentially, that morphed into other things. And so it's very, very similar because, you know, here during patcon, that's what they're doing, right? They're creating this group, but they're also infiltrating other groups. Now, patcon we don't hear about until like 2007. I think it comes out first in a Newsweek article. And the reason for that is that it didn't lead to prosecutions like the COINTELPRO stuff did.
When you say
a lot less was known about it.
When you say something like patcon never ended, did you feel that way before? Like when you're doing your research on it before the Whitmer stuff, did you feel that way before?
No, I thought it was okay. So I thought patcon was just from the 90s. So
Right.
I thought that, they created this group, the Veterans Aryan Movement, and they, nothing really came of it. But there, there's John Matthews, for example, the patcon whistleblower, who says that there were 20 different patcon operations possibly. And he's identified things like Waco, Ruby Ridge, Oklahoma City as all being patcon and under the patcon umbrella. So I thought those were the patcon. I thought that after OKC that they must have shut patcon down, and I suspected that maybe they started, they did another operation or a similar one, because that's usually what they do. They just roll it out under another name.
Rebrand.
And yeah, there was a similar operation, Primitive Affliction, as well. And so I assumed, though, that this was a thing of the past. I thought that post 9/11 that the FBI was focusing more on targeting the Muslim community. Although since 2015, I think that their focus has actually shifted back towards right-wing extremism and so-called white supremacy.
Of course. Yeah. So when you see something like patcon, you think it's just rebranded, and do you see that now in a lot of things? Like when it breaks like this?
Yeah, I see parallels with patcon, sure. When stuff like this happens, I'm always very suspicious of, an incident like what just happened yesterday. My immediate thought is like, okay, what do we know about the individual, the shooter? What do we know about their contacts? Were they previously known to law enforcement? Were they on SSRIs? Were they in contact with a confidential human source, or a quote unquote retired federal agent like Peyton Gendron was, the Buffalo shooter? So I do see patcon, but it's more just like I've kind of come to recognize the FBI's fingerprints, because patcon, is just one of many things that they've done. You could just kind of start to see their patterns, I guess. So that's what comes to mind with the Whitmer thing, though. As soon as those guys got arrested in October 2020, when they announced it, and Whitmer got up there and did her press conference where she couldn't hold back the smile on her face as she announced this, I immediately was like, okay, whatever they're telling us is not the true story. And so the first thing that came to mind was like, oh, they're doing patcon again. They're reviving patcon. And the weird thing about that, too, is how many people in Joe Biden's administration are actually former patcon operatives. Merrick Garland is one of them. The guy that they wanted to be Chip Roy, or whatever his name is, Chip something or other, the guy they wanted to run the ATF, was another patcon person. So I was just like thinking, oh gosh, I guess they're reviving the whole patcon thing and getting the band back together. Right. That's disturbing.
How long after that news broke did more people know how involved the feds were?
It took a while for discovery to come in. I want to say the guys were arrested October 2020. I don't think the discovery really started coming in until December. In January of, actually maybe after January of 2021, because I believe Ty Garbin, the first person who took a plea deal, who incidentally had a lawyer that was quote unquote former FBI. He took a plea deal before any of the discovery had come in. I remember that and thinking that was strange.
So let's go to the beginning of this. Maybe we can start by, although I'm sure most people know who Whitmer is and what happened, like when the news broke.
Yeah. I'm sure people know who she is. If you don't know who she is, she's the very loud Michigan governor who's been going on a national tour, currently to grandstand about the case. But to take it back, to give you guys like kind of the official story, and I'll just make it brief because nothing about the case is simple or brief. It's incredibly complex and very hard to distill. So the official story, right, is that in October of 2020, the FBI arrested 14, it was at first 13, and then they arrested another guy, so 14 total the next day. But October 7, they said they arrested 13 men from 2 different militia groups who were plotting to kidnap and kill Gretchen Whitmer. They said that these men wanted to instigate a civil war, storm state capitals, and overthrow the federal government, which is just kind of silly and crazy. And so they were charged with, they broke this case into federal and state. So 6 men were charged at the federal level with conspiracy to kidnap, and then 8 men were charged at the state level for, quote, providing material support for a DT, although nothing actually happened. And they also got them with gang affiliation charges and felony firearm, which is, they claim if you're carrying a gun during the, quote, commission of a felony, it's an automatic gun charge. That's an automatic additional 2 years in prison. So the state guys, a lot of them were looking at like 22 years in prison, although some of them are looking at way more than that, like 40 years, which is crazy. Some of them have a potential future release date of like 2063. Wow. And nothing happened. Let's just make that clear. So this is what they charged them with, though. And then they added a superseding indictment where they charged them with additional charges of conspiring to obtain WMDs.
Wow.
And they also charged them with having a destructive device or whatever, which we can talk about what that is. But so this is the official story, was that these guys, because of Gretchen Whitmer's COVID policies, right, that these guys were angry, and that these militia groups came together during the summer of 2020, held various meetings and FTXs, what are called field training exercises, where they got together. They claimed that, in June of 2020 in Columbus, Ohio, at what the government called the Dublin meeting, they claimed that militia groups, leaders of militia groups from various states got together and that this is where the origins of the plot began, right, at this meeting. They claim that meeting was called by Barry Croft, who is the gentleman they framed as a ringleader, and then later during his sentencing, they decided he was the spiritual leader of the kidnapping that wasn't. But, come to find out, none of that is true. But that's the official story, that these guys were just mad about COVID policies. They came together, you had militias coming together, organizing from different states. So they wanted it to be a multi-state plot, which is very concerning to me. But that's the story, was that, like, oh, look at these dangerous militia groups, these dangerous, right wingers, whatever. They called them white supremacists and stuff like that. But coming together to organize. And they said that Trump instigated them, that Trump told them, to stand back and stand by. And then that Trump had tweeted out, liberate different states. During COVID, he tweeted out, like, liberate Michigan. So they use that to suggest that somehow Trump tweeting liberate Michigan caused these men to do what exactly? To hold FTXs in meetings. And so that was the official story, is that this was going to be some kind of kidnapping and assassination plot. There weren't real specifics of, like, well, what were these guys going to do with her, right? They had many stories. So they said that they were going to, the government claims that the guys were going to take her from her vacation cottage, and they were going to somehow get her in a boat, take the boat out into, like, the middle of the lake, and then leave her there.
Right. Wasn't there a helicopter included in that plot?
Inconvenience her. Oh, that was the other one, where they wanted to commandeer the entire airspace. And Sean Fix, the guy pretending to be a Navy SEAL, he claimed he could get access to Blackhawks and Hueys. So they were going to, get her from the vacation cottage, presumably in an what do they call it? An amphibious assault. I'm sorry, but it's just so fantastical. But this is what the government actually said. It's a bad Hollywood movie.
It's a bad Hollywood movie.
Happen. Yep. They were going to launch an amphibious assault and somehow get her from the cottage into a boat, and then somehow they were going to get her from the boat into a helicopter. The helicopter was going to rendezvous with another helicopter, and then somehow this was going to culminate in 200 men storming the Capitol and overthrowing the state government.
Sometimes I feel like the government hired people who wrote shows like 24 and said, we need you to write out the script for these insane plots. Because that's what it sounds like. When you think about the image of a helicopter and all these things, it just sounds too much. It sounds too on the nose. And it all worked out because this is 2020. And by that point, tensions are so high. And the media has done such a great job of casting a spell on the fearful to believe anything that they believe is going to put them in harm's way. So like the caricature is just working beautifully for anybody, and it falls right into into the hands of like, look, Trump and his MAGA extremists, they're going to take out a governor. It worked out too perfectly almost.
Well, they wanted it to be multiple governors, and we could talk about that, but
we should when we get back to it.
That's the official story. That's sort of the rundown. The one other aspect of this was apparently they also had a loose plot or plan apparently to get her from the cottage in the boat. Then they were going to, and somehow in the dead of like winter, in October in the choppy waters, take her across Lake Michigan, somehow get her to Wisconsin. And then they were going to hold a citizen's trial. I don't know. They were going to hold some kind of trial or something for her. It's like, what? Some mock trial and then public execution or something. Like, this was never going to, it's the stupidest thing. And this comes from Adam Fox, the man who was homeless living in the basement of the vacuum repair shop, stoned one time, talking. Of course, they're provoking him, and he jokes around and says, wouldn't it be great if we got her, took her over the waters across Lake Michigan, and then we all just hogtied her to a table, and we all just pose around her like we did the world's biggest drug bust. Okay, that is a intoxicated, stoned comment. An intoxicated utterance. This is not like a real plan, guys.
Right.
And the FBI knew that.
But they hear it, but it's like the perfect thing for them to be like, well, now we can keep poking this. We can build something and create this image for me, like, I don't, tell me what you think. The goal is to what? Just create more tyranny and crack down on militias?
There's multiple goals, in my opinion. So that's the official story now to kind of unravel what actually happened.
Yeah.
I'll tell you. The FBI basically, so it's funny because I want to make sure I'm saving some stuff for the documentary so that you guys have a reason to watch it, but just to show that the investigation allegedly began in March of 2020. It certainly did not. It goes back before that. The FBI used a network of 12 informants. They used 2 to 3 undercover agents, but they also used what are called OCEs, online covert employees. So these are FBI agents that they employ false personas online. And then they're on Facebook, they're on Twitter, they're on social media, and they're pretending to be, a patriot, quote unquote. So this is patcon, right? And militia folks, they're pretending to be that, and then they're creating like Facebook pages, Facebook groups, and then they're funneling people into those. So why is the FBI doing that, right? That's a question. But we know that Steve Robeson, who is a career criminal, this is one of the architects of the Fednapping hoax. He is also a convicted child sex offender. He has a history, too, of working with the FBI, going back to the 80s when he was involved in biker gangs. He has a story that he heard chatter amongst the 3%ers of threats against law enforcement, and that he contacted the police to kind of warn them about it. And that's how he becomes an informant in October of 2019. This is a month before the Wolverine Watchmen were even founded by Joseph Morrison. So this investigation goes before the group was even created or founded. And but that's in the FBI's files, by the way. The FBI said under oath, they testified to this story, that's how Robeson became an informant, that he went to law enforcement about these vague threats. And of course, this was just chatter, so that was not documented. Well, we come to find out, evidence now shows that's not what happened at all. He was flagged in something called Operation Bronze Griffin. This was something that social media companies were doing during 2020, where they were voluntarily running keywords, flagging people online for keywords and giving that information to law enforcement. So law enforcement gets Robeson that way because of things he's saying online. And that is actually how he becomes an informant. Dan Chappell, who everybody knows as Big Dan. He was seen as the main informant. Well, really, Roby is the main informant. Dan, I would say, is the secondary one. He's the one that rises to become basically the leader of the Wolverine Watchmen. So there's many reasons they want to do this, right? They want to take over any group that is created. Joe created the Watchmen on Facebook, just as a Facebook group, in November 2019. And by March of 2020, the FBI had infiltrated the group using somebody who is a Iraq war veteran, posing as an operator, posing as one of the heroes that helped rescue Chris Kyle, you know.
Oh, wow.
And so he becomes the XO of the Wolverine Watchmen, the executive officer. And it's interesting because I don't want to give it away, but in the documentary, you're going to find out that the entire idea for the Wolverine Watchmen came from the FBI, not Joseph Morrison. He created a Facebook page that was basically for preppers, right? It was for, this guy lives out in the country in Jackson County, Michigan. It really is country for people who don't know. Out there, you know, if you need to have an ambulance or call law enforcement, it's like 30 minutes before they arrive, maybe 40 minutes. You need to know how to defend yourself, but also you need to know kind of like basic medical stuff. These are just good skills you should have. And so the FBI basically took this prepping group and created an actual militia with it. And then the FBI is the one that called all these meetings and had these various FTXs. Now, the Dublin meeting that the government says, where the government claims the origins of the plot began, where it was hatched, they said Barry Croft called that meeting. That was called and chaired by Steve Robeson, the convicted child sex offender and informant. He called and chaired that meeting. And that meeting had about, I want to say 13 to 14 attendees. And in the documentary, you're actually going to see a clip from the meeting itself, from an individual who spoke at the meeting, who was the Ohio target, a man named Jeremy Dieter. He was targeted because he was somebody that would attend 2A events and Patriot events, and he would give public speeches. So that was somebody that the FBI, basically everybody at that Dublin meeting, there were 3 or 4 different FBI informants there, all recording everything, and everybody else was targets. All people from different states that the FBI wanted to basically get involved in this. And so how this played out was the FBI had informants that were posing as different heads of militia groups in different states, right? So they had an informant, Jenny Plunk, who was posing as the head of the Tennessee chapter of I forgot to say this, of a fake militia group completely manufactured by the FBI called the Patriot 3%ers. Notice too that they called themselves 3%. So the 3%ers exist kind of as a, I don't know if you would say an organized militia. I mean, it's sort of known as just like a symbol, right? 3%er. I wouldn't say it's an organized group or anything like that. But in any case, people will have heard 3%er.
Yeah.
And it's one of the things you heard about one of the groups that was extreme, quote unquote, on January 6th. They kept saying Oath Keepers, Proud Boys, and 3%ers. Incidentally, all groups infiltrated by the federal government. The vice president of the Oath Keepers was a longtime FBI informant named Greg McWhorter, who had a heart attack the day before he was set to testify at Stuart Rhodes's seditious conspiracy trial. So,
are you suggesting that's a interesting turn of events?
Yeah, that there's like a weird connection there, right?
It's weird. It's like how a lot of security or police officers at the Capitol officers took their lives or passed away. In the days after January 6th. Well, before we go further, I want to go back and ask you more about I think Bronze Griffin.
Oh, sure.
How does that work? Like, they're grooming them online, and like, can you talk about how that relationship starts and then how it then bleeds into reality?
Oh, okay. So just to clarify, Bronze Griffin as the operation is separate from the FBI's OCE type activities. Okay. Bronze Griffin was voluntarily, these big tech companies say, hey, we're going to flag certain keywords and we're just going to voluntarily give that information to law enforcement.
They're like dragging the lake.
It's a dragnet. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And so they give that information voluntarily to the feds, who then look for people that they want to target.
That's
it's
dirty
exactly
work.
The way to find people to target of, hey, here's people mentioning militia on online. Here's people who are saying this keyword, that keyword. And so then the FBI takes these people, and apparently, I guess they're putting them in a database, because we also have documentation where it showed Robeson, the informant, they talk about him being given access to a database of targets.
Wow.
So I think that must have been from Bronze Griffin.
That's
of
crazy.
of what this database was. And so it's very interesting that that's how he actually came on the radar of law enforcement, though he didn't voluntarily go to law enforcement because he heard chatter and, was concerned. That's a lie. They flat out lied, and they lied under oath in their own documents. And so nothing, of course, has been done to anybody who lied. Do
you think you can FOIA request those collections of things from Bronze Griffin? From
the FBI side, not on the end of the private companies.
Not in the companies, right?
Yes.
Really?
So more information maybe could come out about Bronze Griffin. I'd actually be very interested in that too, because Mark Zuckerberg testified in front of the Senate committee October 28th of 2020, where he said Facebook contacted the FBI about the Watchmen also, and I think it must have been because it must have been part of Bronze Griffin.
Wow.
But I remembered that testimony, and I have a clip of that. You guys will see it in the documentary, where it's one of those things where you go,
Yeah. It's so dirty how they outsource this collection, this agency.
Yeah.
For
How
the
about
hashtags.
Jason Chambers?
Keywords. That's
Jason
crazy.
Chambers was one of the handling agents. He's the one that said he was going to run the Wolverine Watchman case as a TEI. That stands for Terrorism Enterprise Investigation. That's the highest threat level the FBI has within the agency to investigate, basically DT. And that gives the agent the ability to utilize all of the resources of the FBI. So to spend millions of dollars and employ overhead drone surveillance of drones following people at 6,000 feet. You can't see them, you can't hear them. And they're just following Barry every single day as he's driving his truck, and not doing anything for 9 months.
Instead of just carpet bombing a country with drones, with bombs, we're just spying on people constantly with Lockheed Martin spy satellites that are omniscient.
Middle-aged truck drivers just going to work every day and then, playing with their daughters.
So that's Bronze Griffin doing the dragnet situation. So then OCEs are the people,
FBI's online covert employees, where the FBI is maintaining these false personas, operating online, meeting people online, and then funneling them into these groups or into militia groups that were actually created by the FBI out of whole cloth. So the Patriot 3 Percenters was created by the FBI. Steve Robeson initially posed as the head of the Wisconsin chapter, but then he announced that he became the national commander. And so the FBI, so the FBI is posing as the national commander of a fake militia group. They had other informants posing as other heads of state chapters. They told Adam Fox, the man framed as the ringleader, that he was going to be the head of the Michigan chapter of this fake militia group created by the FBI. The FBI made the Facebook page for Adam for his Michigan chapter, and the FBI administered the Facebook page. The first person to post on it on June 20th, 2020 was Steve Robeson, the pedo informant, and welcoming everybody to the group. And the business card that Adam Fox had that the FBI seized from the basement of the Vac Shack and used as evidence against him was actually given to him by Steve Robeson, who had the same one, but just with his name on it. So the FBI is creating militia groups, and then they are getting basically duping Americans who don't know better into joining these groups. And then they're hosting meetings and FTXs where the FBI is suggesting that they go do something violent. So at the Dublin meeting, the FBI was suggesting, and remember that this is during June of 2020. So if you guys remember, we were in lockdowns, but there was also peaceful protests occurring, if you know what I mean.
I heard about those. So they look pretty crazy.
One of those peaceful protests was in Columbus, Ohio that night, the night of the Dublin meeting. And the FBI informants were trying to get these men to go armed into that conflict. And it's just kind of amazing because you think, well, if they did and something happened, what was the FBI's plan there? It's truly bizarre. And it reminds me too of, so I'll just tie this to J6. The head of the Detroit field office at the time, they call him the SAC, right? The special agent in charge of the Detroit field office was a man named Stephen D'Antuono during the entire Whitmer case. 1 week after the guys are arrested in October of 2020, they're arrested October 7. On October 13th, he's promoted to be the assistant director of the Washington, D.C. field office by Christopher Wray himself.
Oh, wow.
So he is actually in charge, overseeing everything when J6 happens. And it's interesting because if we go back to April of 2020, in Michigan, Whitmer has the harshest lockdown. She's very proud of that. That was actually some of her mandates were later deemed unconstitutional.
That's right.
But she was doing things like you could go buy marijuana from like a pot dispensary, but you couldn't buy seeds. Right. You couldn't go get your hair cut. Like all of these
straight up
arbitrary, tyrannical, bizarre things she was doing upset a lot of people, really on all sides of the political spectrum. So these rallies were occurring, in Michigan at that time. There's one in April and there's another one in June. But the one in April, there's two in April. There's April 15 and April 30th. At the April 30th one, this is at Lansing. And of course, Dan Chappell, who becomes the XO of the Wolverine Watchmen and essentially the leader of the Wolverine Watchmen, tells his FBI handlers that, hey, I think the Wolverine Watchmen are going to do something. He says that they're going to, and he tells the FBI this before this rally occurs. He says they have a plan to storm the Capitol. And only a few of the Watchmen even were there that day. So it's like, if this was a plan, you're going to have 6 guys storm the Capitol, really?
Right.
What kind of plan is this? But that's what he told his handlers, is that the guys had a plan to storm the Capitol. So the FBI, and this is hilarious, the FBI, like I said, Agent Jason Chambers, who has his private intelligence company, we'll talk about that in a minute. But there's another one, Heinrich Impala, who is a known perjurer, by the way, previously accused of perjury in other cases, said of him by a defense attorney and a former U.S. attorney for the Western District of Michigan that he can't tell the truth. Oh. He has problems telling the truth.
Oh.
He occasionally lacks candor.
He has a doctor's note for that? How does that work?
So he's overseeing this at the day that this rally occurs, where the informant says, hey, these guys are going to storm the Capitol. The FBI sets up a mobile command center and says, all right, so we're going to have you go. You wear your recording device. It's going to be a live wire. So basically, the informant could talk to the FBI in real time. They think that Pete Musico, Joe Morrison, the founder of the Watchmen, his father-in-law, they believe he has a live grenade on him. And all of these men are in their full kits. They're fully armed. And they go to the Capitol. Now, there's tons of people there that day. They stood in line, actually. This came out at trial. They stood in line for an hour and went through COVID screening before they got into the building. There was no storming of anything.
Went through COVID screening. Great.
Yeah, they got their temperatures checked. They went through the COVID screening. Totally peaceful. There's video of them inside the building, though. But anyways, the informant says into the wire that, hey, I think these guys are getting ready to do something. He doesn't really say why he thinks that. But the FBI tells the Lansing Capitol Police to stand down, open the doors, and let everybody in. And so what happens is you end up with these pictures the next day and all of these media outlets of the guys, the Wolverine Watchmen, in their gear with their arms, inside the building. And there's this one picture of them lined up against the wall. And people don't know this, but I'm pretty sure Whitmer's in the room behind them. She's in there. Like, they hadn't like evacuated her at that point. So you're just kind of wondering, what is the FBI's plan here? They've got these armed guys. Their informant says that these guys have a plan to storm the building. They think one of them has a live grenade. And so the FBI says, let's just tell them to open the doors and just let everyone in. Let's just see what happens.
Maybe you disagree, but I don't think they're above sacrificing anybody, right?
Yeah, well, they wanted that photo up. I mean, honestly,
sure.
Part of me thinks they wanted something to happen, and there's other stuff with this too. So it wasn't just Whitmer. They, they wanted other governors too. So Robeson at these meetings was naming Governor DeWine was one of them. So that was a governor in Ohio, and they had an Ohio target. They had a Virginia target, a disabled Vietnam veteran named Frank Butler, who they were trying to get to kidnap and kill Ralph Northam. Now, the FBI sent this man ingredients to make homemade explosives, and then they told him to double the ingredients. The informant in pedo, Steve Robeson, offered the use of a drone for some absurd plot where they were going to have Frank Butler, the disabled Vietnam veteran, launch an assault on Ralph Northam's North Carolina vacation home, which would include the FBI, their informant, providing an explosives-laden drone that they were going to fly into the home and explode it. It's insane. It's insane. So they wanted it to be a multi-state plot. I think they wanted it to be a 15-state plot. They keep talking about the Boogaloo, like that these guys wanted to start the Boogaloo or whatever. The Boogaloo was always a Fed thing as far as I can understand. But in any case, from my understanding of what these guys thought it meant, they thought that that was referring to what they saw as an inevitable civil conflict. Not that they wanted it to happen, but they thought it was going to happen, and they wanted to prepare and train in the event that it did.
Which is, again, just like Gladio, them staying back or staying in places like Italy, and basically invading these places before they were invaded by communists, but then performing false flags to then blame the people that they were supposed to fight.
Yeah.
It just doesn't stop. What percentage of FBI cosplaying do you think is actually taking place now when we see these atrocities? Do you have any, do you think about that? Because I can't help but think about everything. I'm skeptical of my skepticism, but I can't help but think about it.
I know. It's one of those things that, I don't want to sound paranoid, or I don't want to just see things that aren't there. But we do know that the FBI now uses tons of CHSs. They spend millions of dollars on the confidential human source program. And from what I can see, many of these informants, if you can even call them that, they don't really act as a traditional informer for law enforcement like you would expect in a sting operation, that an informer is somebody that is there acting as like a passive, listening post, basically just there to observe and report back to law enforcement something that's like a crime already in motion, and then they stop it before it can happen or something. That's what you would think of as an informant, but that's not what they do. They act more as agents provocateur, and you can read the definition for informant versus provocateur in Black's Law Dictionary. Agent provocateur more aptly describes what the informants in the Whitmer case did. And so we know they'll go as far as let's just say the Whitmer guys are all just regular people. Literally, if they could do this to them, they could do it to you. So when I see some random person do something like what happened yesterday, first of all, it's not easy to carry out something like that, to do that alone, and to have that kind of accuracy. What kind of training did this person have? Because they're saying the wind, because of the wind, that kind of threw off the trajectory of the bullet by just a little bit. So I'm going, well, then how skilled is he as a marksman? That doesn't make sense to me, that this is just some random person. There's always more to the story. So I always think that this person was probably in contact with somebody that was grooming them, like Peyton Gendron, the top shooter who was talking to a retired federal agent in Discord, and the FBI took over that investigation, and we never got the name of that individual, did we?
How surprising. And when you say informant, it makes me think of the Haiti assassination that happened in the past few years. Did you follow that story at all?
That was so crazy. Yeah. How many of those guys turned out to be U.S. defense contracters that were sent down there? Yeah,
and they weren't stopping it. They were in the house, I think, as the shooting happened.
Yeah.
And now supposedly we're here, last I heard, the wife might have been involved. And she was even shot, I think, in the leg that night.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So it's just unbelievable. And then thinking about what happened yesterday with Trump, it's so scary that, it could just be a pandemic of incompetence, and this person somehow snuck past a surveillance state onto the roof. But it just seems like a lot of people perhaps just allowing it to happen for the same thing we were talking about with patcon, with Whitmer, because they can then portray a monster. They have a new boogeyman that fits the narrative they've been selling forever. Because it's so hard to believe this guy was able to be on this roof.
Oh, I know.
But that's the other thing that's so hard, is the news is coming so fast at us from every direction. You hear various witness accounts. How do you trust it?
Yep.
It's very, very difficult.
It takes time to unravel. Like the Whitmer thing took time to unravel. I thought I knew the case when I started covering it. I didn't know the case until I started speaking with, the actual people involved, until I started interviewing the guys, talking to other people who were at meetings, who were at FTXs, getting their stories. And then, if everybody kind of has the same story, you go, okay, yeah, this makes sense. Then you start finding things that corroborate that. So it takes time. My concern, though, is how long it took them to put a name out there. Is this person a patsy? Like, do we really know? Because there were reports of multiple shooters by at least one witness. And of course, they could be confused and that could be inaccurate, but it's strange. And it reminds me of Las Vegas.
Yes.
And there's just the kind of chaos and the weird things that were being reported that never were followed up on and stuff like that. So it concerns me, though, that number one, they took so long to release the name. It seems to me, and there's no social media for this person, like, oh, did they scrub it before they had the time to put this name out here? Like, how does this person have no internet footprint, really?
Right.
That's just kind of strange to me. And then for the FBI to be the ones investigating it, like, okay, so the people who orchestrated the Fednapping, we're going to put them in charge of this.
We should totally trust them.
Yeah, right. And then Whitmer, who has been spending, the last 2 weeks going on national TV to grandstand about being a victim. And she's been saying, she went on The View, she went on CNN with Abby Phillips, she went on the Colbert Show, and she's saying that Trump tried to have her assassinated, and she brings up the Fednapping as if she is some kind of victim or something. And I just want to address her role in the hoax real quick, just so that people understand that she's not a victim. And when you see her up there lying, it should disgust you. Whitmer is a co-conspirator in a joint venture conspiracy on the part of the FBI, the Department of Justice, the Michigan State Police, the Michigan Attorney General's office, the governor's office, and her security detail to deprive innocent men of their rights. That is what happened. So the FBI's investigation goes from March of 2020, and it's going nowhere, right? In May of 2020, we've got the informant, Dan. He's texting his handler, and he's saying, these guys don't have a plan. They're not really doing anything. Are you wasting my time, in a sense? That's what he's asking the FBI. Now, that is in May. Then the FBI is saying, try to get them focused, try to do this and that, introduce this person, do this or whatever to make this a thing. In July, Paul Beller, the 20-year-old kid, he leaves the group and he creates his own group, which the FBI calls a ghost group. That group, he reiterates, we are defensive only, and we do medical training, and that's it. And he's saying that because he started seeing these FBI informants and their behavior. He didn't like it. Dan took him to a meeting in the Vac Shack, and undercover agent Mark Schweers is there, and Adam Fox is there. Adam is on steroids. He's stoned. He's worked up and saying crazy things. Paul, and we have this on recording, says to Dan outside the Vac Shack, that guy is effing crazy. I don't want anything to do with this. So Paul then leaves the state of Michigan and moves to South Carolina. Why does he get arrested and charged with material support and gang affiliation and all this other stuff? Because he attended some of these meetings that were put on by the FBI and an FTX where he taught somebody medical at one of these events. Wow. Well, none of that was illegal. He didn't do anything wrong. It's pretty crazy. And he's one of the people who could be in jail for 40 years. And it's just like, But why
Is
though?
it
He did nothing.
is it just guilt by association in the eyes of the feds?
Yes. Well, because the feds labeled the Watchman a gang, so they are saying he was part of the gang. So it's
Wow.
gang affiliation. They said he provided material support for DTs because he was at the trainings of the Wolverine Watchmen. And it's just crazy. None of it makes any sense. So,
It doesn't have
anyways,
to. It doesn't
he,
have to.
no, it doesn't have to, but he leaves. So that's July. He leaves. Barry's kind of, he lives in Delaware. He doesn't even live in Michigan. Barry, who was framed as a ringleader, he's not even part of the Wolverine Watchmen. He's not in a militia. He's just an older guy that talked a lot of crap and got stoned a lot. So they're saying, try to bring Barry back into the group. So they're kind of floundering, and the FBI has this TEI. They've spent all this money. They're like, all right, the election's coming up. We got to do something. So the FBI at this point decides to introduce the undercovers and try to get an explosives thing going on and these recons of the vacation cottage, of Whitmer's cottage. Now, her team and her coordinated the so-called recons of her vacation cottage. That is what I want to make clear. She picked a date and time. The FBI calls her security detail and her, and they say, we're organizing, or like that's what they're doing, the recon of your vacation cottage.
Wow.
What's a good date and time we could have these guys do the drive-by, the first recon they call the daytime recon?
Wow.
So she's picking the date and time for this to happen. The FBI comes to her cottage. They install what are called pull cams. So they wanted to be able to like pick them up driving by the cottage on these pull cams, these videos. So they could say, oh, look at them. They were casing the place, because they wanted to do something. Well, it's all nonsense. She's the one that planned it. Eric, who got duped into going into the daytime recon, he had no idea where he was going when he got in the car that the FBI was driving. He didn't know until he was already on the way there where they were going. They literally drove by the vacation cottage, like down the street, and then the informant takes them to this restaurant, gives Adam a pen and a paper and says, draw a map of where we just went. And so Adam, Adam's very innocent and childlike. He does that. He gives it to him. And then they organize another one, which was the night of the Luther FTX. This was another FTX put on by the FBI in Luther, Michigan, September of 2020. It would have been the September 12 through 13 weekend. And then they do the nighttime recon. Barry thought he was going to do land navigation training. We have audio of him in the car. So Adam and Barry are in, there's 3 vehicles on the nighttime recon. The FBI is driving all of them. And they have Adam and Barry in the back seat, and then there's 3 feds. So 2 defendants, 3 feds in 1 vehicle. More FBI than not. And the undercover agent says to the informant who's driving, the undercover is in the passenger seat. He goes, do these guys know where we're going? And Barry in the back seat says, destination unknown, destination unknown. And we have that audio. He didn't know where they were going, which supports his story that he thought they were going to do land navigation training. And meanwhile, the FBI drives them up to her vacation cottage. Barry also fell asleep in the car. He didn't know. He had no idea where they were going, and he literally fell asleep. It's just so ridiculous. But Barry is now in Supermax prison because of this. And it's because of, Whitmer organized this stuff. Like I said, she picked these dates and times. And then the FBI, we have text messages of the agents telling the informant, try to invite Brandon Caserta, try to invite Daniel Harris, try to maximize attendance.
It seems like a fully funded Jussie Smollett situation, right?
Yes.
Like they just got the whole Hollywood spectacle for her. And do you think, has she been directly questioned about her involvement?
No, which is surprising to me because, it's now documented that she and her team coordinated the overt act these men are charged with. So that's the thing that is disturbing. Entrapment is illegal. That is the overt act, was the recons of the vacation cottage. She planned it. She organized it with the FBI, the Attorney General's office. She's never had to answer any questions. Moreover, in the state case, for the guys in Jackson County, Joe, Pete, and Paul, she was able to give a 3-minute long victim impact statement that was highly prejudicial. They played it in open court. She's the governor. You think that the judge is going to like go against her? You think he's going to impose a fair sentence when she's saying throw the book at them?
Right.
You know, we need to make an example of them. We need to protect democracy. She made it about lone wolf shootings, J6, and defending democracy. And it's like, meanwhile, she organized this stuff. She created the overt act that they charged these men with. She's also the head of the Michigan Department of Corrections, technically.
Oh, I didn't know that.
These men, after they were sentenced, they were taken, they were in MDOC, Michigan Department of Corrections. And mind you, these are the state guys. They had not been charged federally. They'd been charged at the state level with just providing material support, the gang affiliation and felony firearm. And they, on the eve of their appeals, they moved these men from MDOC to federal BOP facilities across the country. They sent Joe to Pekin, that's in Illinois, FCI Pekin. They sent Paul to Schuylkill, that's in Minersville, Pennsylvania. And then they sent Pete to FCI Gilmer in West Virginia. So that really made it impossible for their families to meet with them, for their lawyers to meet with them. We have proof of legal mail being returned to sender where they weren't allowing these men to have their transcripts to prepare for their appeal. So a year and a half goes by. They're still in federal facilities. I have to, raise hell basically and fight about this. Finally, these lawyers are filing motions to bring these men back. So finally, they've been brought back. Just recently, there was supposed to be an evidentiary hearing where we were going to find out why this happened, right? Who made the decision to send these men to transfer them out to federal facilities? They weren't charged federally. And I can't say yet, not for another week, but there's stuff is going to come out about that. We'll just say that information is out there about what happened and why. Somebody made the decision, we'll just say, that some individual had to sign off on 3 different transfer orders. That person had been subpoenaed and they were supposed to testify at this evidentiary hearing that's supposed to be on the 19th of this month.
Whoa.
Now, the government, the state of Michigan, it is really the government, but, the state of Michigan doesn't want this to happen. The Michigan Attorney General's office has effectively postponed that evidentiary hearing. They're going to say, well, look, we remedied the situation by bringing them back to Michigan. So now that they're back, a year and a half later, no, most people's appeals are already done by now. It's still too little too late. You can't just, but really they don't want them to look into why this happened, who signed off on it. And that's what people are going to find out, is that these men they shouldn't be tried in Michigan courts. They shouldn't be held in custody in Michigan either. They should actually be out on bond pending appeal. They were out on bond during the trial before their conviction and sentencing, and they never violated those conditions. They maintained the ankle bracelet or whatever. So let them out on bond pending their appeal so they have the proper time to confer with their lawyer, since they've already been set back so much. Well, this is right. All of this is happening right now as she decides to drop her book and do her national book tour defaming these men. She's trying to interfere in their appeals. The Sixth Circuit right now is considering taking up Adam and Barry's case. Adam and Barry were the ones convicted federally and a hasty retrial. So the first federal trial ended in 2 acquittals and a mistrial on Adam and Barry. So it was very bad for the government. No convictions, 2 acquittals. They had to retry Adam and Barry, and they basically did so in what I would call a Soviet kangaroo court, right? Where you can't introduce evidence, you can't call witnesses, and then they can just cherry pick the worst things you said while intoxicated and while the FBI was amping you up and asking you hypothetical questions, like, hypothetically speaking, when would it be okay to use violence? Taking that response out of context, playing a 1 and 17-second clip like that and saying, basically, listen to these awful things they said. You should convict them because of words.
So it sounds like the establishment media. That's exactly what the
ignore
media does
everything
today.
that the feds did. So they were convicted in this hasty retrial. Judge Yonker in the retrial limited the defense's ability to cross-examine the two men who took plea deals. They put time limits on the defense, but not on the prosecutors. They could talk, they could do direct examination for an hour, hour and a half, but the defense was told they had 25 minutes. And then Judge Yonker started counting down. He would go, 5 minutes left. He'd say things like, you really want to waste the last of your time with this crap line of questioning in front of a jury, basically demeaning the defense. He made it really clear that he was rigging that trial. So, of course, Adam and Barry were hastily convicted there. They put the state cases, there were 2 state cases, the 3 guys in Jackson County, 5 other guys in Antrim County. They paused those state hearings because they had to first convict Adam and Barry as terrorists, because they couldn't charge the state guys with providing material support unless they convicted the federal guy. So it's like super crazy how all of this has happened.
It sounds like, it reminds me of, there's a journalist who was at the Capitol on January 6th, and when his court date came around, they were basically prosecuting him, saying, you're domestic terrorist, you've stormed the Capitol, you're a danger to society. But he was there as a journalist and he had credentials, and when it came time for evidence, he presented years worth of credentials from various things he's reported on around the country, and the judge said you cannot show that in court. Yeah.
Wow.
It's really scary stuff.
That's exactly what happened with the Whitmer case. Anything that was exculpatory, they just wouldn't allow in. I usually have my little binder here. I have this binder where this is what they're trying to, and this is really what the appeals are going to focus on, is all these exculpatory statements, right? So you have the guy saying things like, when the FBI suggests that they kidnap a governor, you have one of the guys saying, like, absolutely not. We're not going to be black bagging politicians, taking them out of their cars, arresting them, whatever. Like, those statements there, and there's tons of them, but there's also incriminating things said by the FBI that show how they planned and set up every single thing that was used in this case. And so the defense put together 250 of these, and they called it out of court statements they wanted to introduce as evidence. They wouldn't allow them in. Judge Yonker made up this bogus hearsay ruling where he said that from a audio recording of an FTX that's maybe 5 hours long, the government can cherry pick anything that sounds, anything of the guy saying offensive things, the government could take that out and play it. But anything exculpatory the men said or incriminating that other informants or whatever they said on the same recording, they called that hearsay.
That is infuriating.
And wouldn't let them admit it. It's crazy. So you're going, well, we know it exists. We know it's there, but the jury doesn't get to hear about it. That's the kind of stuff that they did. And so the Sixth Circuit right now, they asked, so they don't usually do this. This is what gives me hope that they're going to take up the case. They had oral arguments on it, and the defense argued that, hey, we didn't get to introduce evidence, we didn't get to call witnesses, and all these other things happened. They, there was allegations of juror bias. One of the jurors in the retrial, when he got jury summons, said that, I hope I get on the Whitmer case because I'm going to hang those guys. And that wasn't properly investigated. That guy actually became the jury foreman.
Oh, wow.
And so there's a lot, right? That should have had a proper Remmer hearing. Then there was the issue of the Bertelmann's rule, which was putting the time limits on them, the arbitrary time limits. So basically the Sixth Circuit said, okay, well, provide additional briefings on if these exculpatory out-of-court statements and the incriminating ones from the informants, if they were allowed in, would that have substantially changed the outcome of the case? The defendant said yes, the government did their briefing. So right now, the Sixth Circuit is considering sending that back for a new trial, but saying now you have to allow them to introduce evidence and call witnesses. The government does not want this. If they have to do that, I think they won't even retry them.
Right.
Whitmer will say, listen, I'm being magnanimous and I understand these men are human too. And they've done enough time. She's had them in supermax prisons, the 2 federal guys, and then the state guys they sent to federal prisons anyways. So she'll be like, we're going to be gracious and just not retry them.
How nice.
But if they do, it would be crazy. And then, of course, she's going on and she's just trying to intimidate, I think, the Sixth Circuit into not giving them a retrial. When she's going on national TV saying Trump tried to assassinate me, who do you think she's trying to influence? And then I think about Judge Wilson, who is going to be making his decision on whether these men should be allowed out on bond pending appeal so they can properly participate in the appellate program. When he sees his governor and his boss and the head of the MDOC on national television saying things like this, that's not supposed to influence him, or the Michigan Attorney General's office or any other people in Michigan who she's their boss.
It's all narrative control.
There should be a gag order on her right now while these appeals are going on. She's the so-called victim. And Dana Nassel, by the way, the Attorney General, she was somebody that was identified as a potential target. Now, this is all made up, but the FBI claimed that she was a target. So she herself is a, quote, victim in the case. How, if the state of Michigan, the Michigan Attorney General's office and governor's office are the victims, how are they also the people prosecuting the case?
Well, that's the kind of logic. That's the kind of logic they roll with. When it comes going back to the Whitmer recon thing, can you think of, or can you anticipate any defense she might have when it comes, if someone is able to confront her? Like, how can she play that out?
Oh, she'll just say, "Oh, I was just assisting and cooperating with law enforcement." Like, she'll just play dumb.
Just more victim status stuff.
I think also, too, a lot of that stuff, and this is another interesting thing, but I'd go off on a tangent to get into this. I think a lot of that was handled by her lawyer, her private attorney at the time, who I believe was the liaison between, and I don't know this for sure, but we do know she coordinated the recons and stuff like that. But I think that the person who was the liaison and did most of the talking was her personal attorney at the time. And he ended up having to, so he used to be her private attorney. His name's Mark Toten. He was promoted to be the assistant U.S. attorney or the U.S. attorney for the Western District. So he was going to be on the retrial of Adam and Barry. He recused himself. And the defense lawyers tried to FOIA his recusal memo because they were thinking the same thing I'm thinking, that this guy's the one who did the coordinating. Wow. They never provided the recusal memo where he said why he had to recuse. And so I'm thinking that, yeah, that's
just
probably
connecting
why.
all these dots. Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. When it comes to the OCEs, do you ever feel like you're coming in contact with them on Twitter? Like, do you feel like they come after you?
Probably.
Like, are you suspicious of people, and why are you suspicious of certain people? Do they speak a certain way?
So what's weird about the OCEs, like you wouldn't initially recognize it. So the way that they used one of them, Lauren Hastings, Special Agent Lauren Hastings, was operating a persona of a woman named Elise Marie. Elise Marie is a girlfriend of a man named Mark Woods, who is a patriot interested in the militia. And basically, she befriended Adam Fox, the guy who they framed as the ringleader, the homeless man living in the basement of the vac shack. His girlfriend, Amanda Keller, this woman befriended her online first. So they used the women because, women are easier to manipulate, right? We'll use that as our in. Wow. We'll befriend Adam's girlfriend. And so she just kind of said, oh, my boyfriend, Mark, he's interested in firearms, stuff like that. He's real interested in joining a militia, but he's not really part of one right now or whatever. And basically that's how they introduced undercover UCE Mark, whose real name is Special Agent Mark Schwiers. I like to name and shame them, by the way.
Yeah,
who
I
was
like
posing as Mark Woods.
That's great.
I always let them know because I know they watch, and I like to let them know. I haven't forgotten them,
hello
and I'm
out
not
there.
letting them off the hook.
Thanks for watching.
So that's how they do it, though. Isn't that insidious? And so she introduces, she says, let's link up Mark and Adam. And what's crazy about this is that this is in, like, I want to say maybe May of 2020. In June of 2020, Special Agent Mark is at some point, so there's this meeting that the FBI puts on in the basement of the vac shack. This is the one that Paul was at, where Adam was saying kind of crazy things that the FBI had been amping him up for. And Mark Schwiers, Mark Woods, was there also. And he's the one, and we know that the FBI did this, that sent these pictures to Adam Fox over Facebook of Mackinac Island. And this is the private residence of the governor there on Mackinac Island. And what's crazy about these pictures, and they put them, I don't know why they did this, but they put them on the projector during the final state trial of every single picture. It was obvious that this was FBI doing this shit. He had close-up pictures of even the gate and the lock, and I'm like, wait a second, this is private property. How did he get these pictures this close?
He's trespassing, yeah.
He just told Adam that he just, I just drove my car up to check out the cottage. Hey, check this out. So that's the FBI went and took pictures of her cottage in a really crazy detailed way of giving somebody a complete layout of the Mackinac Island property. And even like they even took a Google map aerial view and they drew these lines and marked it up and stuff and then sent the map to Adam. And then they were using the pictures on the map as evidence against Adam. But while admitting the FBI sent it to him and not saying which agent at the FBI actually went and took the pictures. We know Mark Schweers sent them to him on Facebook, but who actually went and took these pictures?
Right.
They wouldn't say, they wouldn't identify the person and who made the map. We just know it was the FBI that did it.
Can we just take a second to say Mackinac Island is a very beautiful place. Strange.
Oh, yes.
For those who don't know, you can't have a car on Mackinac. I think there's only horse and buggies. I've been there for the stone skipping competition once, and it's a really interesting place, known for really nice fudge. I did not know that that's where they keep the Wicked Whitmer.
Yeah, well, not anymore.
Dark Island. Well, yeah, not now.
Now they've exposed the residents, just like they decided to put Barry Croft's social security number right up there on the screen for all and sundry to see, and everybody's personal addresses, of the defendants, their families, in a way to completely disrespect them and their privacy. They put phone numbers up there. They didn't make any redactions, but they would redact things, of course, about the FBI and their 12 informants and undercover agents. And
I wonder how much of our tax dollars goes to FBI cosplaying these situations and then feed the information to the CIA's Mockingbird media, and it's just a feedback loop of fake crap constantly. Like, it seems as if a lot of this stuff, and we don't know what happened yesterday yet, but I can't help but see certain things. It doesn't seem possible that this guy, this 20-year-old, can just do it. Perhaps he had help. Perhaps it was just a flaw of incompetence. But I really don't know. When you see these people, the undercover people online, like, are you watching for certain types of red flags? As I see people post, things about "show me your guns." That to me on Twitter,
God.
that to me is like, don't do that. Don't do that. I get it, but don't do that. Are there other things that you watch for?
What's so crazy about this is it's hard to say, and I don't want to be. So one of the things about the Whitmer case, and one of the goals the FBI has, is to make everybody think that, organizing in real life is too dangerous. Don't do it. Don't go meet with people. Don't train. Don't exercise your rights. These men, militia groups have existed in America. It's an American tradition. And in Michigan itself as a state has a history of having it being a big militia state, right? This is not uncommon, and none of the stuff that occurred during this was illegal. And like, they themselves had to admit this at many times. Like, they took a video of Paul while he was training to get a CPL license, and then they played that video and tried to make it look like that was him running around with a gun and an FTX. They didn't even say that this was from his firearms training.
Wow.
And so they could do things like this. But the goal is to get people scared. I think they don't want people talking to each other. As far as red flags to look out for, it's tough, right? Because sometimes you have people who are just boisterous and say stupid stuff online, and they have no intention of doing anything. Barry Croft was one of those. He was a big talker, right? But if you know him in real life, he doesn't do anything. What is creepy to me about what I've seen with these informants is it wasn't like that. There would be no real red flags online because they're smarter than that. What they would say is, hey, let's get together. Let's get a group together of guys, let's meet together. And, once they have you there, they want to establish a rapport and a relationship with you. Look for the red flags as somebody who, like Dan Chappell, would be there at 2 o'clock in the morning if you needed him. If you had a flat tire, he comes out, he's helping. He may even offer to pay for it if you don't have the money to get the tire fixed.
Right.
If you can't afford lunch one day, he would buy you lunch. He would pick you up and take you to events. It's things like that, paying for your hotel room.
Right.
They put Brandon up when they invited him to one of these FTXs because he couldn't afford to go otherwise. For Barry, when he couldn't afford to go to the Cambria FTX, the FBI had their informant, Jenny Plunk, say, oh, I'll drive from Wisconsin to Delaware to meet you in Delaware, pick up your 3 daughters and drive with you to Wisconsin so you don't fall asleep. Like, they would make it happen, right? Anything to facilitate you showing up to an event. That is something to be careful of. For Thomas Leaguer, who was the Wisconsin target, Steve Robeson was trying to get him to be a Kyle Rittenhouse. Oh yeah, the FBI was all over that stuff that was happening in Wisconsin. They had their informant telling Thomas Leaguer he should go out armed and guard the business fronts and stuff. Now, Thomas has no training. Why should he go do that? But it's like they want to put somebody in a position where something bad could happen. It's things like that. Now, as far as things they would say at these militia meetings, that's even harder because at these meetings, you know, when you think you're just in the privacy of your friends, you're drinking, you're smoking, you're kind of venting and you're ranting, letting loose, there's the assumption that it's safe to do that. That's what all Americans do. We do it around our dinner table. We just don't have the FBI recording it.
Or do we?
Or do we? We have Alexa doing it.
Like, yeah, like it's coming. They got speakers in the sky with
have
their
these
spy
Ring
satellites.
devices now.
It's tough because I'm
goodness.
trying not to be jaded because there are nice people in the world who do want to genuinely help you.
Yeah.
But the more you do read about this, I'm constantly having to balance my skepticism of everything and paranoia. And I think it's okay to have a healthy paranoia, but it's so widespread and going on for decades. I think it's crazy if you don't think about this stuff, especially like in this world, especially if you're on Twitter, you know, like it just seems like they're in all the shadows and
they're everywhere.
Yeah.
And we've got contracts, right? So I was reading federal contracts of the FBI signing up with one of these companies where they can be surveilling and monitoring people they wanted to be able to do it on Twitter, all the mainstream tech platforms, but then they also wanted to be able to do it on Gab, on Telegram, on the Fediverse, on all of these other places where you know,
they'll infiltrate
where
everything.
Basically where you think you can go to meet like-minded people or to just, you know, talk to friends, whatever. Like, you should be of the situational awareness that the internet itself was created by the military. And so every technology has a dual application. It has its commercial use, but it also has its military and intelligence use as well. And that's everything. So your mindset should be that the internet is itself it's a battlefield of sorts, and you should be operating with the assumption that there are bad actors on there, because you know that there are, you know, we know that other governments engage in propaganda. They have like the UK has their, what is it, the 77th Brigade, they have their PSYOPs unit, they're running PSYOPs online. This is the thing that kind of makes you go crazy, right? That we're doing PSYOPs, but we say, oh, it's okay because we're only doing it to foreign audiences. But then those foreign countries are doing it to us, so we're psyoping them, they're psyoping us, and then it's like, well, there's no truth then. And then where's the truth? It makes it really hard to sift through all this crazy stuff.
That's why it's a war on reality. Like
yes,
the way
exactly.
you see the way you see the world is under assault constantly, and it's not unique to now. It's always been that way.
Hearts and minds. It's always change. They want to change your perception of things or win you over. It's mind war, like Colonel Aquino wrote, huh?
That is like the future, and I don't think people realize that enough, and especially people who, I mean, I don't want people to be addicted to the internet. I think the internet is like you're saying, it's a battlefield. It's also a two-way mirror for all types of bad people to observe you and your patterns. But if you're going to be passionate about this stuff, and we're in a world where politics has infected everything, you kind of have to know what you're getting into, because you know it's such an interesting contrast between me and, you know, I was just in New York with family who only watches certain channels on TV. Their view of reality is so different than mine. And I sound like a crazy person to them. I understand. That's fair. I get it. But it's funny because growing up, someone like my dad, he would be like, you got to go through all the channels on TV to get a better perspective on reality. That doesn't apply anymore. It's great, but it doesn't apply anymore because the internet has changed all that. You know, it's a mutilated reality, as has TV, and TV wasn't always the greatest either. But
well, and the internet has made it easier for them to catalog us to you know, they like to kind of silo people, segregate them into smaller and smaller groups, and a lot of that is used for like, you know, commercial purposes like advertising, you know, so they like to break us up that way. But then I think they like getting people separated into these kind of small self-contained echo chambers because then they're easier to manipulate. There's less of them. And also when you're in these echo chambers and you're just engaging with like your side or people that agree with you, nobody's challenging you. You know, no one's challenging your beliefs, your assumptions, and then you're talking to people about things that they're kind of going to have the same opinion as you. So it's sort of like, well, what's the point of doing that? Then you might as well just be talking to yourself. But they do that for a reason, because then these communities kind of isolate, they can radicalize each other, you know, because they're not interfacing with reality and they see things within the way that their little sphere, their niche sees it. And like you said, their information that they're looking at, if you don't know the things you don't know, right? You can only see the things that you're being exposed to. You don't know everything else. Well, in these little small silos, that's basically what happens. That happens on the left and on the right.
Oh yeah.
You see it, especially, I think it's more pronounced with the left, and they've done studies on Twitter that show right-leaning people follow a more balanced, they tend to follow people on the left, people that they disagree with, and they follow people on their side. People on the left, they were only following other leftists.
Yeah, they're a human centipede.
Yeah, they just create this little circle jerk. And then they're looking at everybody else, not interacting with those people, but thinking that they know them, thinking they can judge them. And this is how we get things like, you know, they do these big exposés on, like, you know, Pepe 79 on Telegram, with it they've just decided to dox and ruin his life, and it's just some random person that, like, you know, works at a grocery store and like shit posts online, and then they tell themselves that they're somehow engaged in journalism or, you know, fighting these like battles, and it's just incredibly embarrassing. But that's where we're at now. And then to see how the internet has divided people, how much of a distraction it can be, how much people are glued to their devices. It wasn't always like this, but I feel like they influence us so much. Cambridge Analytica, for example, had 5,000 to 8,000 unique data points on each American voter. And that's from their ability to just collate data about you going back from like the earliest times you were on the internet and putting that information together. You know, what books do you buy on Amazon? What clothes are you ordering from? Where do you live? Like, that's
disgusting.
Do you know 5,000 things about yourself? No, I don't.
No.
So they know you better than you know yourself. So they can nudge you. They can curate your newsfeed. The algorithm can decide what you see, what you don't see, and they can nudge you that way.
That's why I see it as a godless movement, because they're trying to be like a false omniscience, you know, like a false god that controls you, and then they can do what they want. They can read your patterns for commercial reasons, to weaponize it against you, to do what they're doing with the Whitmer stuff, any number of reasons, stuff I haven't even thought about yet. So, you know, it's some of them are just experimenting on you and your brain. You know, it's any number of things, and it's really crazy stuff. And before I let you go, I want to ask you, when do you think Governor Whitmer will be President Whitmer?
If I have anything to say about it, never, right? Hopefully when the documentary comes out. Oh, she wants it. She's already said she's going to run in 2028. She's actually said she wants to be the first female president. If you read her book, True Gretsch, she put it out. It's about maybe this thick.
I did see her holding
very
it. Yeah.
Thin,
did you read
very
it?
Embarrassing.
Did you read it?
I haven't read it, but I've seen parts of it, the parts that I thought were relevant, where she talks about the Fed-napping. But I mean, a lot of it is just her, like, I don't know, she's just self-aggrandizing, you know, bragging about her wealthy parents who were both like lawyers, I think, or something. And then she's talking about this relative she had who she claims fought the KKK or whatever. It's just like nonsense of
just
her
a lineage of great people, just
puffing
like her.
herself up. Yeah, trying to make herself look important. And this is basically, it's her pitch to run. It's her pitch to be the president, you know, where she wants to be simultaneously the Iron Lady in the leather jacket. You know, she calls it True Gretch, which is her play on True Grit, as if she's ever had to have grit in her life growing up in the privileged manner in which she did. But simultaneously, she's also the victim of President Trump trying to assassinate her.
Right.
She's also said that she wanted to talk to, quote, some of the people who plotted to kidnap her. Well, my suggestion to her was that she just talk to herself, her security detail, her friends at the FBI and the DOJ and the Michigan Attorney General's office who planned it with her. You know, like, are you going to talk to yourself? You're the one that planned the recon of your vacation cottage. Like, honestly, this is ludicrous. But she doesn't want to talk to these men. She's saying this because she wants to make herself look magnanimous. Like, oh, she could be fair to the other side. They kind of want to present her as less extreme, honestly, than some of the other like AOC types, you know what I mean? Where she'd be willing to talk to these guys. But if you read what she said, she wants to talk to the guy who took a plea deal, to basically had to sign a government document saying he can't contradict her narrative and the government's narrative. So this isn't going to be a real conversation. It'll be her and Ty Garbin or her and Caleb Franks under extreme duress, where it's like a hostage situation where these guys, if they don't say that narrative, you know, Ty Garbin, by the way, is already out of prison. He never even appeared on the BOP website. Incidentally enough, the guy who took a plea deal, already out, supposed to be in a halfway house. Now I think he's home. Never appears on the BOP website.
That's very
Kind of makes you wonder.
Sounds like a Ray Epps type character.
Oh, it really does. And I have questions about Ty Garvin.
Interesting.
But she'll do a sit down with him. It'll be very controlled, hostage situation type thing. And he'll say, oh, yes, Whitmer.
Wow.
You know, I painted my boat black, which he actually did. And he also engaged in a little side thing that he was doing with Dan Chappell, the informant, which was the informant was trying to get these guys to sell guns to felons and drug dealers just to add on additional charges, you know?
As one does.
As one does. Yeah. And Ty Garbin is one of the idiots that went along with that. I think Caleb Franks was too, the other guy who took the plea deal. And Dan Harris, one of the men who was acquitted, he actually sent parts of the gun to Dan Harris's house just to try to get him roped up in this side thing of the ghost guns to felons thing. So maybe they could talk about that too, you know, during their little staged interview. She'll never talk to the 5 men who were acquitted. She won't even acknowledge them. She did bash the jury in Antrim County, though, along with Dana Nassel. And they maintain that these men are basically guilty, even though everyone knows it was a hoax at this point. And then she'll never sit down with any of the 5 guys who are currently incarcerated, even though I've talked to them and their families, and they said, if I was allowed to be there and I was allowed to record as well, they would have no problem sitting down with her for an interview and talking to her.
Wow.
Joe Morrison is considering going into the priesthood. He's an Orthodox Christian, the founder of the Wolverine Watchmen. He could be incarcerated until 2063, but you know, he's forgiven her, and he actually prays for her and her family. And he's like, oh, I would talk to her, no problem, you know?
Wow.
If of course, that someone was recording it and I could be there as well, he'd be willing to talk to her, but she'll never talk to Joe Morrison.
They'll undermine her whole narrative. And that's the whole thing she needs. And one more thing, going back to how we started this with what happened with the assassination attempt, are there things you're looking for specifically as news comes out with this shooter that's going to alert you to think patcon stuff or not patcon?
I wish, but unfortunately, in a normal situation, we would have had the name sooner and there would have been more information to find. Like I was able to do with Peyton Gendron before they were wiping it down. We were able to get, into his Discord server that he set invites to people. And that's how we were able to see who he was talking to somebody in there. And he talked about taking a pledge and some other stuff. And then they, turned out he was talking to a retired federal agent. I would be looking at things like that. I would be looking at what was this person doing online? Was he in any kind of chat rooms on the dark web like Adam Lanza was,
Right.
and who was Adam Lanza talking to, right? But it would be something like that. Somebody maybe talking to him in Discord, somebody that maybe groomed this person. I'd be looking for things like that. But part of me still feels like we've not gotten the real story here.
Yeah.
I'm just not buying that this was like a 20-year-old who was like some expert marksman and was able to bypass. Like, let's take this story. This 20-year-old kid is able to bypass one of the world's so-called premier law enforcement agencies, the Secret Service, that's supposed to have such a great track record of success, and yet he was able to position himself
on a nice low roof.
Yeah, why did they not have the high ground there? Like, what was going on with this entire situation? It makes me feel like somebody inside the Secret Service, allowed this to happen. Like maybe multiple people.
Well, that's the theory with JFK, right? There's a lot of interesting stuff with the Secret Service.
Yes.
And since, like you're saying, you'd be looking for digital footprints type stuff. Since that's not there, I think the only thing I'm looking at now is how the establishment media portrays it.
Yeah, and the investigation, how the investigation is run, if we can get any information from the
investigation.
FBI. Yeah, right.
Well, thank you so much for being here. Where can people find you? And do you have when's the documentary? I'm like dying to see this.
I'm dying to get it out. Honestly, this project has been massive. It's been crazy. I had no production company when I started this. I was just an independent journalist, like YouTuber in my basement. And it wasn't until I talked and interviewed Brandon that, we were like, oh, we have to make this a documentary. I think, we've come a long way since then. But there's also 4 trials. The federal trials are not televised, so I have to work with the transcripts and record voiceovers. And there's a lot of stuff I have to do in addition to all the travel I had to do in those interviews. So we're in post-production now. The trailer is up. The first trailer, people can watch that now if they want to get an idea of things on the website, which is just the letter K and then ANDK film.com. I didn't want to buy the domain kidnappingkill.com because it'd be a little weird. Might get on a list for doing
You're probably
that. So
already on one.
You're
probably already on one.
Well, yes, and we know that they monitor and all of that just because I'm in communication with the guys and everything else. But so you can watch the trailer, K&K Film. We just added some really cool merchandise to the website. So there's like a merchandise section. Cool. You can support the documentary there and support my work. That funds my ability to travel, to give these guys commissary money, to send them care packages, to do all that stuff. But we are going to be dropping our second trailer in about 3 weeks here, and you'll see it'll go up on the website as soon as we drop it. You'll see I'll post it on my Twitter and the official Twitter and YouTube for the documentary. That trailer is going to be an extended trailer, about 3 minutes long, and it's going to be very different from the first one, which we cut when we'd only done one interview, and we kind of cut that trailer to fundraise the project. Now we've done over 20 interviews. We've traveled across the country. Great. And, we've done a lot more. So the second trailer is going to, I think, reflect that. And then we're thinking actually that the story's so big, we have so much footage, we think it's not even going to be one documentary, right? Because I won't sacrifice those details. So I think we're going to make a mini series and we're going to be putting out episodes. So my goal, actually, once we put this second trailer out, I'm going to try to fundraise with that to hire someone to help my editor so we can get the first episode out before the election. That we don't have a lot of time. We've got 4 months here, but depending on what we can raise and the people, if we can hire more people, we can get it done faster. Basically, we can at least get part 1 out. That would be ideal. But it's going to be, I think, a mini series of 45-minute long episodes that are going to tell the story. And really, I mean, it's going to cover the Whitmer case, but it also will touch on patcon. It's going to touch on stuff like that, OKC, whatnot. We're going to tie patcon to the Whitmer case. We're going to bring it forward to J6. You're going to hear from the guys. There's so many trips I've made too, like that people don't know and haven't seen the footage from. So there's so many different personal stories and crazy things that have happened. Amazing. It's going to be, it's a wild journey. You're basically following me on my journey as I travel across the country and attend these hearings and, you know, talk to the guys and follow up with them. There's multiple interviews with them at different times prior to their trial. You know, with some of the state guys, we interviewed them before their trial, then after their acquittals. And it's a lot of stuff, like I said. And then just the sheer information, like you can't sacrifice those details. You know what I mean?
I've seen the some of the transcripts. Perhaps you posted some of them from the court dates, and those alone are insane.
So voluminous. 14 volumes of transcripts from just one of the trials, and there's been 4 trials. So we're talking like we're dealing with 16 terabytes basically of information, and then all this additional footage. My computers couldn't even handle, we couldn't even get everything on one timeline. So we had to connect my computer to my editor's, who's several hours away, and get them.
I hope you're backing all this up so they don't come in and nuke all your stuff. Please. I
do have backups, but it's just crazy, guys. Like this has been, and it's been so expensive to do all this. Like we've crowdfunded all of this. We don't have anybody, no production companies, you know, paying for any of this. Everything we've done, I've had to fundraise for and like fight for to get it done. And I'm so proud of like what we have so far. I think it's going to blow people away because we're talking like, we wanted the quality of something you would see on HBO or Netflix, but basically done with a team of like 5 people.
That's great. I think DIY is the future, and that's the best way to tell the full truth and the way you want to, and you get rid of the middleman that way.
Yeah, and I'm free. I don't have any person editorially telling me like you can't call that FBI agent out. You can't say this. No, I'm in control of it all, and I will own it all. So
that's great.
That was super important.
I'm excited to see it when it's out. I'm excited to share it. I hope everyone finds you who doesn't already know you, finds the work, and follows you online. And again, thank you so much. And until next time.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Bye.
Have a good night.
You too. Crazy, right? It's a crazy, crazy world. I was thinking also, you know, I'm always like, I am skeptical when I see these things in news, like we were talking about earlier, just going through all the scenarios that could possibly be happening with the Trump stuff. And it's also, there are just deranged people in the world acting alone.
Yeah.
I don't know to what percentage anymore, but I was thinking about,
well,
I had
I just want to say
Yeah.
on that, like it gets tiresome, like on the internet where it's like celebrity dies of old age and they're like, what did they know?
Suddenly?
Yeah, suddenly at 78.
Oh, no.
It's like,
people do die.
They do die.
And there is just deranged violence.
Yep.
You know, I, thinking about that, thinking about just isolated deranged violence, I knew I had a friend, an old friend from home. Her older brother was just shopping in a supermarket, in our local supermarket. And some psychotic person just left his home that morning or afternoon, whatever it was, walked in that supermarket, found the first person he saw, came up behind him, which was my friend's older brother, just opened his throat with a knife and killed him. Just completely random. And it was shocking, right? Like it just shocked a community, you know? So I think a lot of us do have proximity to violence like that. And you also think, of course, some crazy person just does this crazy stuff. It is crazy, all the things this Trump shooter had to go through, but there is also psychos.
Right. Yeah. And that's sort of what she was talking about too, with like, was something planned or was something allowed? Was something facilitated?
That feels the most right to me so far.
Yeah, but it's like every detail that gets added makes you recontextualize the one that came before it.
Right.
And
who they voted for, who they donated to, what shirt they were wearing,
what their parents do for a living, like is all become part of the speculation and,
Right.
and what neighborhood they live in.
And everyone with a certain political persuasion is now profiling this person from different angles.
Yes.
So there's like 6
everybody's
versions.
convinced of what they already thought.
6 versions of this person. So you have to kind of go through all of like the prism of this person's life.
And it's universal. It's not like one side's doing it and one side's not. It's very
right.
Like, look at this. It's so obvious that, like, the same fact, right? The same fact he's a registered Republican. It's so obviously he was a Republican and he didn't do that. It's so the other side. It's so obvious that he didn't just throw people off and
then within those,
because it's an open or it's a closed primary state. So obviously he wanted to vote against.
Within those pockets of people, there's other pockets of people.
Yeah.
You know, so it's there's so many versions. Do we have a caller?
We do.
Okay, so right before we get to the caller, I just want to shout out to Grofty. We got $2 from Grofty. Shout out to Grofty.
Shout out Grofty.
He said, "Kick the like button." That's what's up. I appreciate it. Thank you for watching. And let's get to a caller.
Let's do it. Give me just one moment.
Man, oh man. Hello there.
Hey.
How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
We're good. Thank you for waiting. We'd love to hear. We'd love to hear your story.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Of course.
Well, this is my first actual visual experience, the supernatural, and to set it up, the house that I lived in, it was a 2-story house, and when you went through the front door, there's like a staircase that went all the way up, and you can see the whole upstairs. But when I came home this particular night, the lights downstairs were on, so they're kind of illuminating a little bit up on the 2nd floor, but I couldn't see that well. Anyways, at the time, my dad was married to this wonderful lady, let's put it that way.
I heard wonderful in quotes. I heard wonderful in quotes.
You absolutely did.
Okay.
Yeah, and, she is, at the time, it was, we didn't have cell phone stuff, but I write friends notes on paper and all that. And I saw a dark figure come out of my dad's bedroom from the left side and walk all the way into my room, which was, I'd say 25-foot distance between the 2 doors. And I thought, it must be her going in my room snooping around, because that's what she used to do. So I stood at the bottom of the staircase and just waited there. And I was like, okay, I'm going to catch her, when she comes out of my room and ask her, what are you doing? Doesn't happen. And so I'm like, okay, well, then I'm just going to go in my room and catch her snooping around in my stuff. So I go upstairs and I go in my room and there's nobody in there at all.
Uh-oh.
All the lights are off. Yeah. So that definitely freaked me out. I was probably about, 12 at the time when that happened. But it was just strange because I definitely watched somebody walk into the room. I know you've heard about the dark figures and stuff.
And so this dark figure in particular, was it just more human-like? Can you describe? Give us
it was
some
definitely,
details?
Yeah. I mean, it was definitely human-like. It was just all black though. That's the weird thing. And the lights were off up there, and like I said, and just the lights were illuminating. But I watched it walk. Walked like a human, acted like a human. So that's why I thought, oh, it's definitely her going in there.
Wow. Were there sounds or temperature changes?
No, not that I remember, but there was definitely a lot of bad things that happened in the home with regards to my family. There's a lot of dark energy there. And I've had other people in the house experience different things too. So yeah.
Are you of the belief that this entity could have been born out of bad things that happened in the past?
I think so, because I'm telling you, the second our family moved into that house, our family got torn apart completely.
Wow.
I mean, it ruined everything.
Oh, so do you think there was something in the house already?
I think so. I mean, I know I thought it was like maybe the person that lived there before, but when I was originally moving in there in my bedroom, I found a note in the closet that said, oh, this house is built on an Indian grave, and it's haunted or whatever. And I just kind of threw it off like, okay, this is like the last people just trying to, screw with us. But
However,
yeah, no, a lot of bad stuff happened in that house. So
yeah. Did you see that figure again?
I did not. I did not.
Were there other instances with this sort of supernatural stuff?
My stepbrother, he had experience there, and he got super freaked out by it, so I believed him. But he said he was in one of the bedrooms, and he heard a voice say, "I'm gonna get you." And he came running. We were watching TV, and he came running in the room, freaking out. He's like, "There's somebody up there talking to me," and and all that. But that's the only other, supernatural type thing I've heard there.
Did you ever do any history on the house?
I did not.
I'm always curious if that note meant anything that you found, or if it was just someone messing with you.
I don't know. I just always assumed, yeah.
Assumed it was a joke. Maybe they were warning you, like, you know what?
They probably were.
This house is crazy.
But I was too young to even care or think about it.
When the family's all out of that house now.
Oh yeah.
And
this was back in California, but yeah.
Okay. And was anyone else in the family like visited by anything else like weird, like your brother or anything afterwards?
No, but like I said, there's just so many horrible things that happened in the house with our family.
Right.
Like we went from a great tight knit family to just complete the opposite. As soon as we moved in that house, like not even a year into that house.
There are people who would say they're entities that feed off bad behavior and making it worse. I don't know, Wesley.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts when it comes to this kind of stuff? Like you've been experiencing stuff in a house that's been odd lately.
Hold on, there we go.
Sweet.
I don't feel like a person who can give advice on something like that. Like
it's always different, right?
Yeah, and like I just don't know. I'm still in a state where when I see stuff, I'm still hardcore questioning what my eyes saw or my ears heard, and like.
It's like, are we projecting these things out into this world, and then we're perceiving things that are actually coming from within?
Yeah, or like, is it a totally natural occurrence that your brain interprets into a completely different thing?
Thing
like
is,
pareidolia type.
Right. You see it,
and
your brain is telling you this is what you're seeing.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, caller, I'm sorry, I didn't get your name, by the way.
Oh, Ambi.
Ambi. Like, we have had other callers with very similar situations who've been in bad, tragic situations, and these sort of entities emerge from those. So it's, again, like what Wesley's saying, I don't really know how to describe these things. So sometimes I feel like we are projecting them into the world. Other times it feels like they're feeding off of our suffering. It's really something else. But
well, I have a couple other stories if I have time to share.
Let's hear it.
Okay, cool. This is another one that happened in California in Leona Valley, if anybody's familiar with the area. It's kind of like a little country town outside of the cities and stuff, but there's a 4-way stop sign there, and when I approached the 4-way stop sign, I was with my friend in the car at the time, and it was nighttime in the middle of summer. There's a hay and feed store on the left side, and then there's like a convenience store or gas station on the right side of the street. And from the left side all the way to the gas station, there was this woman and a child, and they were holding hands and they were walking across the street, and then they disappeared. But the strange thing about it is they were all white. Like, I call them fog people because I don't know what else to call them.
That's a cool.
Because that's just kind of what it seemed like to me.
Right.
And they were. The other thing too is they were very detailed. Like, I could see that the woman and the daughter were wearing dresses, and the mother had like a long, one of those old hats that are droopy and long. And then my friend was in the car with me, but the other part too that was strange is the time felt slower all of a sudden. Like, I remember it felt like it happened for a long time, but it was not that long, if you know what I mean.
Interesting. And they just walked into the distance and disappeared?
Yeah, and my car was facing them the whole time, so my headlights were in that direction. It's almost like my headlights illuminated them even more. But it was definitely
affect, the lights.
Yeah.
And you mentioned you were at a crossroads, right?
I was at a crossroads. Yeah, and my friend was in the car with me, and she because I freaked out and I was like, "Did you just see that?" And she started freaking out, and I was like, "Well, I wanted her to tell me what she saw, so I know that I wasn't just tripping." And she
Good
explained
journalism
it
skills.
detail to detail. Yeah, yeah. She explained it detail to detail, and I was like, "Wow, that was trippy. That was
Wow.
weird."
Maybe you slipped through a
But
time
also,
portal.
yeah, I don't know. But
Or
there's also just a sense of peace there too, which is really
interesting.
strange. Yeah.
When you say intersection or all the stop signs, it made me think of Crossroads, and they used to hang people at Crossroads a lot back in the day,
Oh yeah.
18th century type stuff. I encountered a lot of that when I was in Georgia, because the idea was they wanted to confuse the people's ghost after being hanged, that they were lost in
Wow.
the crossroads.
Wow. Yeah. So who knows? I tried to look into some history about that because that one just always stuck with me. Like, man, that was so weird, and especially because I didn't experience it alone.
Right.
But I couldn't find any, history or anything about.
You go back
something.
and try to recreate it.
Yeah.
It never happens.
Yeah. Right.
And did you have another story to share?
Yeah, I have another one that's that happened to me that's strange as well.
Let's hear it.
This is more of like an outer body experience, I'd say. So I was about 16 years old, and I was in church, and it was praise and worship time, I remember, and everybody was standing up and singing or whatever, and it was definitely more one of those theatrical type churches where there's lights and whatever, but concert style. So I was standing there with everybody and singing songs and stuff, and then all of a sudden I got, I guess, taken out of my reality and into a new reality, and the only thing that I saw was I was like a bird in the sky, and I was looking down on the land, and there was this massive mountain of a man, but it was just like his torso and his shoulder and his head. And he was all black, and the strange thing about it is, like, there was a bunch of people, probably thousands, and they were all running to it and kneeling to it. And then I snapped back, and my hands were in the air, and I was singing church songs again, and I was back in church. And it was very brief, like 5-second vision or whatever that was. I have no idea what it was, what it meant. This day I wonder what it meant. But
that's interesting. You have no like interpretation of it at all?
The people I've talked to, they're like, oh, it could have been, the Antichrist, or it could have been, the Messiah. Who knows? But I wish I had some more clarity on what that was, but I have no idea, and I didn't really even have much of a feeling that came with it either. I know I wasn't afraid, but I wasn't at peace either. It did spook me out, but not, I don't know, it's just very strange. And that was the only time I've had something like that happen in my life, where I'm just literally taken, I felt like I was taken out of my reality into another one, watching something.
Did you feel in control when you were flying?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Like,
I
was
you could
able
move
to
your
look.
head, like it was like lucid dreaming.
Yeah, I was like, I'm able to look around and watch the scene, but it wasn't a very long scene.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's wild.
Weird.
I haven't had any experiences like that. Have you? Yeah, I've never been. I can't think of like an out of body experience that I've had. Well,
I should say I had one
too.
that was not an out of body experience, but every time I have a seizure, it's
that's
like
right.
that's a strange kind of otherworldly experience. But nothing ever where I felt like I was in this world and I could see my own body or see something else.
I see something so specific like that. Well, I really appreciate you sharing your stories tonight, and I appreciate you waiting around to tell us.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you guys so much.
Of course. Have a good one.
All right, you too. Bye.
Do you want to share any of those out of body? Is it too crazy? It's a lot. I don't want to put you on a spot. You can totally say no.
In a nutshell. Well, first, before we go there, we do have a super chat.
Oh, sick.
It's from Joey Hall. And he said, my wife and I saw a pair of translucent legs walk across our front yard Friday night. Also, here's some money. So thank you for the super chat, Joey.
Crazy. That's a crazy image.
That is, yes.
Wow. So you've had some...
Yeah. So I have a neurological disorder. It's called Wolff-Parkinson-White. It is something, it's kind of something everybody has to a degree. It's just the level of, is it on, like, how deep into it? So it's the same thing as, like, if you've ever met anybody who passes out at the sight of blood, that is Wolff-Parkinson-White. It's when an external stimulus that doesn't have any impact on that particular part of your body your perception of it causes you to have a physiological reaction. And I just have it to a high degree. And it's transient, which is interesting thing.
And what do you mean by that?
Like, so one time on the basketball court when I was a kid, somebody bounced the ball right in front of me really hard, like off the ground, and that sound caused me to pass out. But I play basketball all the time, and like I've been hit with the ball before.
So you just never know what the thing could be, which makes it all the crazier in my mind.
And like, you know, I've shut my hand on my car door, passed out, you know, like that. It's been, you know, like sudden flashes of light. It just can be anything, you know. But when that happens, when I do pass out, it's like my essence is being sucked through a mile-long straw and then coming out into a place that is all light. And it's hard to describe.
Can you describe the light? Like, is it
it's
a bright, blinding light or a comforting light?
It's like a web of light, like interconnected lightning.
Wow. So is it pulsing or is it like a place of just static light?
It's like static, and it's hard to, like, the perception of it is more like a memory than it is looking at it. You know what I mean? Like it's more of impulses or notions, like collating together into an image rather than an image itself. Does that make sense? Yeah. Like it's
layers and layers of.
It's as if you. It's almost like echolocation. Like, but like if you were building a visual, your brain was building a visual off of all of the things that your other senses are putting together. You know, sort of like Daredevil. Wow. You know, like Daredevil can't see, but he can see because of his other senses are heightened to a degree that his brain programs like a three-dimensional model. Right. And that's what like it's like in there. I can only remember elements of it, obviously, and when I come back, like, or when I wake up, it's like a hard reboot of my brain. I don't remember for like, I don't know, 10, 15 seconds. It's like being born. It's like, I don't know who I am, where I am, English, the whole operating system reboots.
If someone's around you, do they hear you trying to talk or do you not even attempt?
I don't think I attempt. So like a friend of mine, I had like a full-on grand mal seizure when I don't even know what happened. I just know I woke up on the couch and he was sitting there in like the recliner chair across from me. He was like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, "I don't feel very good." And I was like, "What happened?" You know, like, because I don't even remember at first, like when it all comes back later. You know,
right?
Like,
but it does come back. That's wild.
Yeah, it all comes back later. Like the first 10 seconds comes back, but I don't remember it immediately. It's like a reboot. I don't know how to describe it.
Yeah.
And I don't know. Like
where do you think you go? Like, do you have any? Like, do you have any interpretation? Like, are you deep in some other part of your brain?
Maybe. I don't know.
In
like
another dimension. Like, it's a very interesting thing that you see. Have you talked to other people who've had similar experiences?
Yes.
And they see similar things, or?
Yes, I have talked to one person from my hometown. I'm not gonna name him, but she like made a post about it on Facebook one time, and I was like, "We gotta talk."
And she happens to be from your hometown. That's
well,
wild.
like Indianapolis.
Okay,
like the greater Indianapolis area.
Right.
So like not from the small town I'm from, but like maybe 20 minutes north of there.
Right.
And we had like one really long conversation about that. About what it was like, and she had a very different perspective on it. Like it convinced her that like she sunk into like solipsism, like
she's the only person alive.
Yeah.
So how does she? I wonder how people who are solipsistic view you, like when they come in. It's just part of their world that they are controlling. Yeah.
But she was like, it pushed her into more of a nihilistic kind of place of like, oh, there's nothing but my own mind, and it pushed me the other direction, like that there's way more,
of course.
And I don't know, like I don't know what to think about it. It just is what it is, you know. Like I don't have some grand perspective on like, oh, there's an afterlife. I already believed that. Like I already believe that there's an afterlife, but I don't understand it. Like I don't.
Maybe you go to a waiting room.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's Abraham's bosom is the waiting room. Like,
can you explain that?
Abraham's bosom is just a waiting place before Christ, where souls went to be discerned. There was a chasm between it. I don't know what that means. Like, there's a lot that like. I'm a believer in the Bible, but there's a lot of it that it says, here's what this is, and it's like, okay, well, I don't know what that means. You know, you could say like, oh, I'm from Lexington. Lexington, where? I don't understand. You know, like I understand what you're saying, but I don't have the information to understand whoever wrote this particular scripture. It tells you. You just have to use that as like a legend. Does it line up with what you're seeing in the world, just like with everything else? But I genuinely don't know. I don't, and I don't think about it very often, because I think no matter what it is, it doesn't matter long term. It is interesting to me, like, and I think about it, dream about it sometimes, but I don't like she the girl wanted answers and thought that like science, you know, like would prove it, and perhaps it will, you know, it's a measure.
The Neuralink might.
Yeah, but exactly.
But I'm not doing that.
But I have no diagnosis. I have no theory. I just know.
I think being comfortable with the non-answer is the unfortunate route. Maybe not unfortunate, but that's the route.
Yeah.
I mean, I believe in God.
Yeah.
And that's the answer. And all these other things, trying to define them, I just think is out of our reach.
The only thing that I'll ever say that I've somewhat speculated on is the GATE program. Do you know the GATE program?
No, I don't think so.
The CIA GATE program.
Oh, like the portals?
Yes.
Yeah.
Like the higher levels of, that's the only thing where like I've heard people talk about GATE program stuff, especially even on our friend show, Tony Merkel's show. He had a guy who was trying to recreate the GATE experiments, and they talked about these things, and I was like, well, that sounds familiar to what, you know, like
the visuals of it and all that.
Yeah, and like how like the different levels of density and reality, and like what happens to you when you like, because it's like this is a purely physical. Your mind's in a cage, right? You're a ghost in a machine, right? You're, and then on the higher levels, you become more ethereal, and then on the highest level, you combine with the source,
The web of light.
Like the sort of they would call God, like the source, and that seems like a one view of what reality may be, like a very finite through a keyhole, right? But I don't know. But some of the things I said, I was like, okay, well, there's that. This is how that felt, and it. At the end of the day, it could have been a seizure dream, that I have every time. It could have been that,
and maybe even those are some type of portal, to something greater.
Yeah, maybe.
You know? It's just
I just know what I experienced, and I don't even know that it was real. I just know what my perception of it was, and it's strange, that it happens every time.
Well, that makes me want to hear a song. I think it's by Iris DeMint, Let the Mystery Be. And
that's a good title.
Yeah, that's a good way to end this episode. I hope you guys turn this off now and go listen to Iris DeMint's Let the Mystery Be. It's a beautiful, beautiful song. And it was featured one of my favorite shows, The Leftovers. All about not having the answers to this crazy life, which kind of is the theme of the show today and in general. But I appreciate you all tuning in. We'll be back next week. Please like and share this as much as you can. It really helps us out. And you can find me online at Shane Cashman. Wesley, where can they find you in that crazy place?
You can find me on the Boonies HQ.
That's awesome. So thank you all. Until next week.